Good afternoon and welcome to the final in our series of 7 seismic shifts necessary for moving up to enterprise leadership. I hope you've enjoyed this series over the last 6 weeks, and today we're here for the final part, joined again by Professor Michael Watkins. Michael, thanks for being with us today. Today's a tough one to round everything off. You're saying that the need to move from supporting cast to lead role. And if we take that in a kind of theatre environment, basically it sounds like you're saying if you don't enjoy the limelight, this is not the role for you.
So I think what you need to understand is that you are going to be on stage more than you have been before, whether you like it or not. Now, you have some control over the amount of time you spend on stage, right? So that if you're someone who seeks the limelight less as a CEO, for example, you have some control over that. But you don't want to fool yourself that you're not really basically being observed a lot of the time. You have fewer unguarded moments. People are going to be paying much more attention to you typically than they do otherwise, because you really are the focal point for the organization. There's a story I tell about a leader who basically was promoted to the enterprise level and didn't understand that they couldn't simply kind of muse about things anymore, right? That they would sort of muse about something and all of a sudden people would start mobilizing, right? Because they're sending signals that something's important and the organization is reacting to them. And that's just a simple example, right? Understanding that you're the person that people are talking about at their dinner parties down lower in the organization. That's just, the reality of being in that central role.
So there's almost a dichotomy there, because I guess if you're going to be on stage the whole time, you don't want to be playing a role, you don't want to be somebody who you're not naturally, because that's going to be an enormous ask in terms of energy, and there's going to be some slip somewhere where you let your guard down. So to a certain extent you're saying, hey, you've got to be natural, but at the same time you can't muse, you can't say, I was wondering, should we acquire that company, and then that sets off 5 million sparks. So how do you again balance that dilemma between really being who you are, but knowing that there are some checks and balances, because every word you say or everything you don't say is going to be scrutinized, analyzed, interpreted, misinterpreted. How do you manage that dilemma?
Well, so I think you've hit the nail on the head with the fundamental dichotomy, right? Which is you need to exert some control over what you're saying, doing, being perceived. You need to be self-conscious about it, but you also need to be authentic about it, right? And so how do you balance those things? It's very challenging, right? I mean, if you don't have, an authenticity that's an attractive one, you're going to struggle. Let's face it, right? But most of the people that get to senior executive levels have some measure of interpersonal attractiveness that they can draw upon, right? And I think that it really is a matter of understanding how do you prefer to communicate, right? What are the core messages that you want to communicate to the organization about who you are, right? To what degree can you perhaps bias yourself a little bit in one direction or the other? What are some things that you might normally have said that you shouldn't really be saying anymore, like the musing? What are some things that you need to emphasize more than you did before? What's the right kind of presence? Because I think executive presence really is at the core of what it means to exert a lead role. I think it also means understanding the kinds of fora within which you are most effective and not effective, right? So having that self-consciousness, beginning to really think through how do I communicate effectively to the organization, and then just not, assuming that you can have the sort of unguarded moments that you would otherwise.
Does that mean that I need a trusted advisor who can be giving me feedback, saying, in that meeting, maybe you need to tone down this, or maybe the next time you need to do more? Is that an essential rule for an enterprise leader?
So I think some training and coaching of that form can be very helpful, right? I don't think that you necessarily need it on an ongoing basis, although as we talked about a couple of sessions ago, you often do need a good communications advisor that can play some of that role. But I'm a very big fan of leaders getting some form or variation on acting training at some point in their lives, right? Understanding how to ground your body, right? Understanding how to, access the fire within and really project some of that stuff. We can all learn to do that work. Understanding the unintended consequences that you have on people, right, in the way you respond. Understanding that you need to tell stories more, probably than you did before, right? Because narrative provides meaning, right? And part of your job there as an enterprise leader is to provide meaning for the organization, which basically means telling stories or helping people tell their own stories in an effective way.
So people who are watching today, who may have watched the entire series, may be having a nervous breakdown now saying, wow, I've followed this series of the 7 shifts. Each one sounds almost progressively more difficult than the previous one. That's a big ask. Do you really need to be able to manage all those 7 shifts to be an enterprise leader, or is that just in an ideal world?
So I think what you want to recognize is that you're going to come with certain strengths in some and not others. It's not like every one you're going to start at the very beginning, right? You may have some pretty good capability and experience as a strategist, but you may never have played the lead role piece, right? You may be reasonably effective as an integrator, but not have done a lot of diplomatic work. So part of it is really, first of all, baselining where you are in terms of your capabilities. And this is one reason, as part of the new PED program, that we're developing an assessment instrument, a 360 instrument, that will help you get some insight into which of the shifts are the most important for you, because that really then will help you focus in on what you need to pay attention to. And as you pay attention to it, part of it's going to be about getting the right experiences to help, okay, I need to understand more about the external environment. I'm going to start trying to get involved with that a little bit more. Part of it could be, look, I need to get some of that acting training and media relations training to really make me more effective in doing that. Or it could be, look, I need to understand a little bit more about a couple of functions that I don't really understand enough about. But I would say don't panic, right? I mean, it doesn't have to happen all at once. It doesn't mean that you're not coming at it with certain bases already in place. But it does provide a framework for assessing yourself and beginning to think about developing a pathway that's really going to take you forward to being an effective enterprise leader.
So, I mean, one of the threads that I think has come out from this entire series is that a lot of these shifts, the things that you can learn. Yes, you may have some innate ability in one or the other, but it's something that you can learn and develop, and that's something you'll be looking at in the PD, the Program for Executive Development. Is there a lack of any one particular shift where you say, that's a showstopper? If you can't crack that one, forget it.
So interestingly, no. I think our experience with working with this framework has been that really there's not one or two that are tremendously dominant. And it's also not the case when we do research with it that people feel like they need to focus in on only a couple out of the whole set. I do lots of work, as you know, with groups of executives here, and we've been doing some testing with this and asking them basically sort of which ones do you think you need to most focus in on, and it's pretty well distributed in terms of top priorities among them. So I don't think there's a particular showstopper here, and I think in some senses that's a virtue of the framework, right? That if there were one thing, 2 things that we really needed to do, my article would probably be a lot shorter.
Okay. So there's not any one showstopper, but have you seen, based on your experience, any trends or patterns where you say, yeah, there's a shift where typically people fall down or people are maybe perhaps more unprepared than another one?
So I think the diplomacy one is one where I see people struggle, partially because they just haven't had a chance to get exposure in the same way, that often organizations don't provide developing leaders with exposure to managing the external environment and those key corporate functions as early as they should. So it's almost more a deficit of development than it is a deficit of ability. And it's why I really, encourage future enterprise leaders to find ways to connect with initiatives that are about shaping that external environment, get access to how government is influencing what we're doing, or the media, or some of the other key stakeholders. I think that's a big one. I think for some leaders, it's the lead role piece that they struggle with. Others, it comes very naturally. They have that kind of presence. They're great communicators, but there are a subset of leaders that don't necessarily feel that level of confidence, and they really need to work on it, and they do.
So we've been together now for 7 weeks. We've looked at 7 shifts. We've looked at the challenges and hopefully some of the solutions that leaders need to address to manage these 7 seismic shifts. What are your closing thoughts at the end of this series?
Sure. So I think the thing here is really, as I said, first of all, to do some self-assessment and really understand, if you aspire to enterprise leadership, right, what are the things you fundamentally need to work on? Which of these shifts are the most important for you to be developing yourself on? Then there's the developmental plan, right? And there's elements there of what experiences do I need to have inside my organization, right? How can I work with the people that are helping me develop myself inside the organization to get those experiences, whether it's exposure to different functions or the external environment, right? And then there's the sort of the more formal education pieces, right? Where can I go that's going to help me hone some of my ability around strategy, let's say, or around integration, right? Or some of agenda setting. You know, are there some more formal, educational experiences that can really help me? This is why, the new PED has really been designed to a large degree, the first module, around these shifts, right? Because we believe they're so important, and we believe there's lots that we can do to help people accelerate themselves along those dimensions.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us over the last 7 weeks. I know that the overview of these 7 seismic shifts is going to be shortly appearing in the HBR, the Harvard Business Review, in June. So if people want to take a look at that, that's a nice way of summarizing a lot of what we've been looking at over the last 7 weeks. And as you touched on as well, these 7 shifts are a key pillar in our new PED, our Program for Executive Development. You've been mentioning the whole way throughout the series that, yes, people can learn to get better in these. So one of the ways that they can do that is looking into the PED program. If you want more information about that, go to IMD's website, www.imd.org, and look for PED, Program for Executive Development. You'll find an overview of what we've been looking at over this series and more information about Michael's work. So that's a great way to go if you want to take this a little bit further. So Michael, on behalf of everybody here in the network, thank you so much for being with us over these 7 weeks. Thank you for giving us clear snapshots of the seismic shifts, and we look forward to hearing more from you as your research continues. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. It's been a pleasure.